I'm Ben Chin. Stay with us.
Attack on the USA. 4 airliners are hijacked, turned into devastating bombs. Thousands of people are feared dead.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me.
The world, shaken, recoils in horror. This is CBC News special continuing coverage of the attack on America.
You are now looking at a live picture of New York City. Famous twin towers that used to make the skyline instantly recognizable are gone. Much of the World Trade Center has been reduced to rubble, as you just saw, and in that rubble, rescue workers are frantically searching for anyone who's still alive. Good morning, I'm Ben Chin at News World's National News Center. We welcome viewers on CBC, News World International, and the USA Cable Network. We have a special hour-long newscast ahead, and our focus is that attack on the USA. In just a couple of hours, the sun will come up over Manhattan, and with the early morning light, the enormity of what happened will become more clear. What we can say for certain, the United States is reeling from an overwhelming attack, and it began with a few cruel strokes. At 8:45, hijackers crashed an airliner into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York. Just 20 minutes later, a second plane plowed into the South Tower. Smoke and flames shot above. Debris and the doom fell below. Then around 9:40, another explosion, this time in Washington. Another hijacked plane hit the Pentagon. And then just after 10 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed and vanished in a cloud of dust, soon followed by the other building.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car.
At 10:10 a.m., a 4th airplane crashed near Pittsburgh. The images are extraordinary, the impact only beginning. Hundreds of the dead are police and firefighters. They were trying to help people when the towers collapsed. Steve Irwin has more on the damage and how it unfolded.
Smoke poured out of the skyscraper, and the scene was a mess. Then, less than 30 minutes later, it happened again.
Oh my God!
A second plane was hijacked, and as people around the world watched on television, it flew straight into the other tower, punching a huge hole through the building.
And I heard a roar, and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up and I saw the second plane hit. Had to be a commercial-sized airliner.
What went through your mind?
That it couldn't be real. Just that it couldn't be real.
We thought it was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism at that point.
There are typically some 50,000 people working every day in these 110-story buildings. Those inside began to flee while emergency workers rushed in a frenzy to the scene.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion, and everybody just started running for the door. Everybody was trapped. Eventually, when the dust lifted, I saw some light and started screaming for everybody to go out towards the light.
As soon as it got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
Were there other people that were hurt, were lying
there? There was a lot of people hurt. They were lying on the floors, coming down the stairs. A lot of people had asthma attacks while they were coming down. It was bad.
A big explosion happened. Some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to.
What did you do? I'm sorry.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
But there was an even greater catastrophe. The South Tower, its steel beams apparently melting from heat and fuel, collapsed on itself.
I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car.
Unbelievably, a half hour later, that scene too repeated itself. Floor after floor of falling debris. Billowing smoke and soot seemed to cover the lower portion of Manhattan Island. There was panic everywhere. And late this afternoon, word that another building at the World Trade Center complex collapsed. New York officials were stunned and somber.
And we will strive now very hard to save as many people as possible and to send a message that the city of New York and the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists.
It's impossible even to guess right now at how many casualties there were in this attack. But it's easy to see in the faces of New Yorkers that it will be a very long time before life here returns to normal. For CBC News, I'm Steve Irwin in New York.
Well, it is now 5 o'clock in the morning in New York, and the CBC's Raj Alawali is standing by near the center of the rescue effort. Raj, 5 a.m. in New York usually is when all the buzz and whir gets started. Very different today, I imagine.
It certainly is, Ben. I'm standing at West Street. I'm looking down towards where the World Trade Center used to be, right beside the Hudson River. And what I can see right now is just soot and dust hanging in the air. It's lit up by floodlights, dozens and dozens of banks of floodlights that the rescue officials are using to try to get some light on the area, and they're to continue with their digging. They're digging with bulldozers. There's a line of bulldozers waiting to go in. There just isn't enough room for all the vehicles to get there. And every few minutes, a dump truck full of debris comes out away from the scene. Now, there is also every few minutes dozens of a group of firefighters and paramedics coming out of the scene. They have the look of exhaustion on their faces. You can see the despair in their eyes. And I talked to a couple of them, and I asked them what they saw, and they said carnage, just sheer carnage. They couldn't describe it much beyond that. I spoke at length to one of these paramedics. Interesting story. He said he was a youngster growing up in the 1970s in New York. He saw the World Trade Centers go up. He said he never thought they'd ever come down. Today, he's been here since 10 o'clock. He's exhausted. Today, he said he saw them come down one after another, both of them. He couldn't believe it. If he wasn't so tired, he would have a tear in his eye. You could see they were moist.
Raj, even though they are emergency workers trained for this type of thing, they certainly don't have experience in anything of this scale. That must make it even more difficult for them.
Well, some of them, Ben, do have experience. There is the Urban Search and Rescue Team. Now, that's a group, that's a highly trained group that goes to these kinds of scenes when there's, for example, an earthquake. And in some ways, this is not much different than an earthquake on a much larger scale, mind you. But in some ways, some of the techniques they use are similar. So they would have experience in this. But you're right, many of the people here don't. We ran into, in the hour or so we were wandering here, we ran into a group of people. They were dressed in orange. They looked like they were official workers of some kind. We talked to them and said, no, we were just in New Jersey across the river here. We were laying cable. We heard this happen. We dropped everything, jumped in our truck, came here, and thought we could help. And they just got right up to the scene and started digging with their hands. And that was at first. And that is an example of what you say, that there are the people who don't have experience in this kind of thing. Now, and for a while now, the professionals have moved in. There are also lots of people here who just are not able to help. We saw two teams of paramedics who aren't trained in this. They're waiting for the scene to be cleared enough so they can go in. They do the light rescue, as it were. But because of the heavy equipment needed, their skills just aren't helpful here. So they're sitting here waiting. A couple of them said, we may be told to go home and sit and wait. So some of that point you raised is very valid, that the experience nobody has at this kind of catastrophe.
Raj, any in that pile that we're looking at, any signs of any good news there today in the time that you've been there?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Any sign of what? Sorry,
any signs of life? Anybody being pulled out? Any survivors being pulled out?
No, no signs of that. None that we have seen. And we've asked people about that, and everybody just shakes their head. They don't respond. They just shake their head or they look down, suggesting that no, there isn't. Now, there are rumors, and I must stress they're only rumors. Nobody's confirmed them, that people are hearing that there are people still in the rubble, but nobody has confirmed that with us. Where they're getting that information, there's been speculation that some of those people have been in touch with others on the outside through their cell phones or whatever. It's hard to imagine they could hear anybody's screams or cries for help because the equipment being used is so loud. So I don't know, other than cell phones or other kind of communication, where they're getting that information from.
And finally, Raj, sort of a personal observation from you. It's always hard to match what you see on television with the reality of standing there. Many Canadians have been to New York, and those who have been to New York have stood before the World Trade Center as you are now. It must be an extremely eerie experience.
Well, you're right. I was thinking of that a little earlier, Ben. I've been to New York 4 times, and every time I've walked around, and you know, when you first get here, and being Canadians, I guess maybe we're not used to this, but you get here, and the first thing you do is you look up and you walk around with your eyes up in the air rather than on the ground. This is what I've done every time because it's such an awesome sight, the skyline, the skyscrapers and everything. And now you can't take your eyes off the street because all you see are the like toothpicks or matchsticks where the awesome sights of the World Trade Center had been. It is indescribable the difference between what you expect to see, what you hope to see, what you've always seen, and what you're seeing now. The other thing that is almost surreal is the amount of paper on the ground, and some of it, when the wind comes up, it starts blowing around. I picked up a couple of these sheets of paper. It's office paper that people would have been using for their jobs when it suddenly happened, just like that. And all of the paper from tens of thousands of offices was blown out on the streets. It's still floating around. And it's almost surreal that you can see somebody's work end just like that. And that's, it's those kinds of images that come to your mind.
Raj, thank you for that.
You're welcome, Ben.
CBC's Raj Ahluwalia joining us from New York this hour. This is a tragedy, of course, playing out in 2 American cities on this day. We've brought you up to date on New York City. We now move to Washington, where the Pentagon was the other target of an airplane attack. Adrian Arsenault is on the story there.
Any warning, any suspicious package?
Before their eyes, the terror of New York flew into their own backyard. At 9:45 a.m., an explosion at the Pentagon.
And the next thing I know, there was this tremendous explosion as it hit the Pentagon. I looked right.
The military nerve center of the United States, workplace of more than 20,000 people under attack. A hijacked American Airlines 757 with 64 people on board had just left Dulles, Virginia, en route to Los Angeles. Then it changed course and crashed into the West Wing. All 5 floors collapsed.
And an enormous gap has been cut in this building.
Mercifully, Pentagon officials say, the plane hit a newly renovated and minimally staffed section of the building. But death here would be unavoidable. As the effects of the escalating catastrophe started to sink in, the United States military at home and overseas was put on the highest alert. And in Washington, a state of emergency was declared.
Everybody back. Everybody back.
The White House, the Capitol building, all empty. And by mid-morning, every federal building in Washington was evacuated, sending nearly 250,000 people into the streets. Across town, early, unconfirmed reports of an explosion at or near the State Department. On any other day, that would be crisis enough. Here, today, it just gets added to a horrible list.
Very angry. Very angry that somebody has such callous disregard for human life.
And it would continue. Just before noon, a fourth commercial jet crashed just outside Pittsburgh. A passenger aboard the United Airlines plane had called police to report a hijacking, only moments before it went down in a cornfield.
I happened to hear the plane come through. It sounded like it was running normal. When it come down over top of me, I seen it go nosedive straight into the ground down here.
West Line commuters were operating trains as quickly as possible.
Across the country, many Americans scrambled to get away from big cities and possible targets. Most high-profile tourist attractions were closed. Most train and bus stations jammed.
West Line Track 1. It's load and go. We'll fill them and they'll go out.
And by midday, for the first time ever, the Federal Aviation Administration grounded every plane in the United States and diverted incoming flights. As of right now, nothing will be flying into or out of here until at least noon Wednesday. And now we are hearing from firefighters that they are still concerned about the Pentagon. There are sporadic fires in that building. The one devastated wing, the west wing of the Pentagon, this newly renovated section of the building, is still considered to be too hot a scene to enter right now. The fuselage of the plane is in that building. Firefighters are saying that it is virtually disintegrated. With dawn, they say they will try to go into the building and treat the fire aggressively. Right now, they are holding back a little bit, but they do say they're going to give it another go at dawn, and the Pentagon officials say that they will try to open other parts of the building at dawn to try to treat this as a business day. Ben?
Adrian, in terms of the investigation, a report in an American newspaper that I think probably will be taken seriously to see what the facts are in that case. What is the paper reporting about a possible Canadian connection?
Okay, this is the Boston Herald. On the Boston Herald's website, there is a story about Massachusetts investigators who say that they have identified at least 5 Arab suspects in that attack. What the paper is reporting is that a rental car was seized at Logan Airport, laden apparently with Arabic language flight training manuals. They have also come to understand that 2 of those suspects may have entered Portland, Maine, in the United States from a spot in Canada. This once again raises concerns, if this proves to be true, once again raises concerns about Canadian borders, and this is sure to be an issue in Canada as well as here today.
Adrian, as Canadian journalists follow that story and Canadians wonder about whether the facts in that story are true, and that may well dominate much of the day north of the border. Tell us a bit about the mood in Washington as this day gets started, especially granted, given that the president last night in his speech said it will be business as usual today, but that would be very difficult, wouldn't it?
Very, very difficult. But interestingly enough, we were on the street earlier in the evening. We've been sitting here most of the night, and I can hear the sounds of mourning, what otherwise would be the normal sounds of mourning, buses, garbage trucks. There is an attempt to turn this into a business day in Washington. They are trying to open many, if not all, of the federal buildings. They are urging people to try to go back to work. Some schools have been closed, but there seems to be a sense in this city that they don't, and in this country as well, that they don't want the world to think that the United States has been shut down, perhaps for one day, but that's it, that they are trying to encourage people to go back to their lives. So I think we are hearing the sounds of that right out here now.
Adrian, thank you very much for this. CBC's Adrian Arsenault joining us from our bureau in Washington. The numbers attached to the story, of course, are overwhelming. The 4 airliners that were hijacked, turned into bombs and destroyed, carried 266 people. In Manhattan, hospitals are dealing with more than 300 people who survived yesterday's blasts. New York City officials say more than 300 firefighters and 80 police officers are missing in action. No one is even guessing at a death toll, except to say thousands. 40,000 people worked in the fallen towers of the World Trade Center. While many victims have yet to be accounted for, we do know that yesterday's attacks did claim the life of one Canadian, Garnet Ace Bailey, a former NHL player who was working with the Los Angeles Kings, was aboard one of the doomed jets. Kim Trinacity reports from Bailey's hometown of Lloydminster, Alberta.
Garnet Bailey was a passenger on the first plane that crashed into the World Trade Center. He was Betty Weaver's brother.
It's hard to come to grips that it's no longer here.
For 53-year-old Garnet Bailey, flying between Boston and Los Angeles was routine. He was a scout for the LA Kings and was on his way to the opening of training camp. Brother-in-law Keith Weaver says his wife dropped him off at the airport.
It was just another day in his life, and I mean, training camp started tomorrow, I believe, and he'd be looking forward to getting there and going through all, you know, the whole thing, I guess, and what they do, and that all came to an end.
Garnet Ace Bailey was a hometown hero from Lloydminster. He was an Edmonton Oiler, played alongside Wayne Gretzky, and even brought home a Stanley Cup ring. And he was a Boston Bruin, winning more Stanley Cups and the respect of his friends and teammates.
He's a very colorful person. You had to meet him to know what I mean by that. He lived life to the fullest, for sure. He crammed a lot into his 53 years.
Bailey made Boston his home, but stayed in touch with his Alberta roots and his family, a family now struggling with his tragic death.
Everything is different because there's no body, there's nothing, you know, so I don't know what tomorrow brings, you know. I guess we're just trying to get through today.
In the next few weeks, the Weavers will travel to Boston. They'll join other mourners for whom this tragedy has struck home. Kim Trinacity, CBC News, Lloydminster, Alberta.
Throughout this early morning, we've been telling you that there has been reports that the UN is thinking of pulling its expatriate staff out of Afghanistan. And at this hour, we're now getting word that it's 80 non-Afghan members of its staff, coordinated through the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian. That office is now pulling out 80 people and moving them to Islamabad in Pakistan. And we'll bring you more on that story as that warrants. The reason being given is because of prevailing conditions around the world. Earlier, they were talking about the fear of American retaliation in Afghanistan. U.S. President George W. Bush was not in Washington at the time of the Pentagon attack, but as you may have seen, he is there now. He is assuring the nation that even though a powerful symbol of the U.S. government has been attacked, the government itself is still operating smoothly. With more on the American president's response to the attacks, here's the CBC's David Halton.
Kite, yes, kite. Get ready.
It's just after 9 a.m. President Bush is at an education event when an aide gives him the first whispered news of the New York bombings. His face clouds with anxiety.
At the count of 3, everyone should be on page 1.
Minutes later, his first official response.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
For more than 3 hours, though, as U.S. forces at home and abroad are put on the highest alert, nothing more is heard from Bush or any other senior official. Public fears aren't eased when Bush flies to an Air Force base in Louisiana, apparently still unsure that it would be safe to return to Washington.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but has befallen...
More words of defiance from Secretary of State Colin Powell on a visit to Peru.
They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy.
As thousands flee downtown Washington,
Clear down the whole area.
There's confusion, shock, and disbelief.
We can't move. We can't get anywhere. Everybody's concerned that there might be other buildings targeted.
Now I know what my parents felt like on Pearl Harbor Day.
It's really inconceivable to us that someone would do that, and so you really can't understand the enemy.
But in this case, was the enemy Osama bin Laden? U.S. officials already say bin Laden is their prime suspect, that only his terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, has the resources and sophistication to carry out today's coordinated attacks. But in Afghanistan, where bin Laden is based, representatives of the Taliban government denied that he's involved.
We strongly condemn it. We want investigation to be carried out.
We could hear detonations coming from that northern area as well.
Later, explosions and rocket fire lit up the night sky around the Afghan capital. Washington quickly denied that this was a U.S. retaliation attack and said the fighting was started by Afghan rebels.
In no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
This evening, Bush returned to the White House after an unexplained visit to the Strategic Air Command headquarters in Nebraska. This was part of his address to the nation tonight.
I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Bush also ordered federal departments to reopen tomorrow, obviously wanting to send a signal that the government won't be knocked off track by the bombings. But no one has any illusions here. It may be a long time before Americans feel safe again. David Halton, CBC News, Washington.
Many people in the U.S. intelligence community say Osama bin Laden is their prime suspect, the possible mastermind behind these terrible attacks. But today, a Pakistani newspaper says Osama bin Laden has issued a denial of responsibility. The sensational Urdu language newspaper Kabrain is quoting bin Laden as saying, quote, "The terrorist act is the action of some American group. I have nothing to do with it," unquote. The paper says it's getting bin Laden's comments through sources close to the Taliban. We have no independent confirmation of those quotes. Meantime, there are reports the FBI is gathering evidence linking this heinous plot to bin Laden. Among that evidence, phone calls, cell phone calls from those 4 doomed planes. Terrified passengers who reach for their phones in the midst of terror. 2 of the calls came from Flight 93. The last plane to crash just outside Pittsburgh. No known survivors, but just minutes before it went down, one passenger called from the plane's bathroom with a chilling message. He said, quote, "We're being hijacked, we're being hijacked." And there's this man, Mark Bingham, a 31-year-old father of 2 from San Francisco. He managed to call home.
He just said, "I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again."
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, "Well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother."
He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, "Well, who are they, Mark?" And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, "I don't know who they are." He became distracted there, as if someone was speaking to him, and he said it's something to the effect of "It's true," and then the phone went dead.
And apparently cell phones are playing a role in this terrible drama in another way. We're hearing that victims trapped alive under the rubble of the World Trade Towers are using them this morning. Families and emergency personnel have reportedly heard from some survivors using their phones to call out for help. Airports across Canada remain closed this morning after a chaotic day. All flights out were cancelled, and hundreds of flights headed for the U.S. landed in this country instead. In Vancouver alone, thousands of international passengers are stranded. And as Belle Puri reports, the city is doing all it can to make sure everyone has a place to sleep.
Jets line up like cars in a parking lot. Some still waiting hours after touchdown to unload their human cargo. As the sun sets on Vancouver International Airport, the day is far from over.
These are just blankets. Okay, don't unload them yet, or maybe put them to our housekeeping at the far wall.
A different kind of cargo has just arrived at a nearby hotel.
You take these off.
There's 2 of those. Perfect.
Cots, blankets, linens. The ballroom is now a bedroom. The hotel is now a home. Staff prepare for hundreds of U.S.-bound travelers now stranded in Vancouver.
Got 3 sign-in sheets, east, west, and center, with bed numbers.
We have 50 pillows and 120 sheets coming in from Whistler as well.
300 extra guests are expected. The hotel kitchen braces for the onslaught. Those who arrived on the first of the 35 jets rerouted from the U.S. to BC have filled the hotel's 400 rooms. All that's left is dorm-like accommodations in what normally are meeting rooms.
We've set up televisions and seating areas so people can watch news, keep updated on things. They will be using our public washrooms that we're going to fill full of amenities and towels and that kind of thing, and we've put bathrobes in there so they'll kind of be looked after from that perspective.
We have toothpaste, toothbrushes, little kids' toys, diapers, blankets, towels, whatever they could send. What are you short? Pillows. Desperately need pillows.
It's been countless hours of sitting in airplanes and waiting in the airport.
In beds number 9 and 10 on this side. Okay. 9 and 10.
They hope it's not too long before they can head off to their original destinations. But for now, the journey has ended. Belle Puri, CBC News, Richmond, BC.
Much the same scene on the other end of the country this morning. International flights bound for the U.S. now parked at airports across Atlantic Canada. Thousands of passengers, mostly American, are in hotels or sleeping on church floors, all of them watching and waiting for news from home. CBC's Jane Adey has more from St. John's.
Haven't told us, but we're going on this bus.
You're going on a bus?
Right.
Where they would sleep last night wasn't the biggest unknown for Tony and Newt Rutter of North Carolina. They spent hours in the air and hours sitting on a runway, and they still didn't know exactly what happened in their country.
I'm angry. I'm
still haven't
shocked. Right. We just what we've heard. I mean, and we don't even know how much of that is true.
They were 2 of 4,000 confused passengers to land in St. John's. The city's emergency response plan was put to the test.
Have you ever had to deal with anything of this magnitude?
Absolutely not.
You guys are all getting a place to sleep tonight. That's good news.
Thank you.
Something to be thankful for after a day filled with terror.
Imagine fathers, mothers, maybe brothers, sisters, children. I was thinking actually the whole day about them, not about myself.
Volunteers at the local university did what they could to ease the strain on tired travelers.
And the guy came over and got the proctor to ring the bell. Everyone came down, and he said, anything you can do to help is appreciated. And there's 90 people in the house, and 63 of us volunteered.
Churches all over town opened their doors to the accidental visitors, determined to shed some light on a dark day.
There's a very few people responsible for what happened earlier in the day, and there's a very great many people who want to do something to right in some way a wrong that's been done.
Great, huh? It's better than Holiday Inn.
But for some, even the promise of a good night's sleep wasn't as powerful as the need to know.
I'd like to watch the news, actually.
It's not one of those things you dream up. It's like a sci-fi movie.
Like a movie, but all too real, making a lot of people temporarily stranded here appreciate what they do have. Jane Adey, CBC News, St. John's.
All too real, but so much unknown at this time, and rumors and speculation are swirling about who could have masterminded this attack. Many intelligence experts believe, as we've said, Osama bin Laden is responsible. But that has the Muslim community in this country fearing a backlash. CBC's Margot McDermott has that story.
Evening prayers at the Al-Rashid Mosque. Silent words for victims of yesterday's terrorist attack. And fear for Muslims living here in Canada.
It's just for them to be calm and to just walk away, because they're going to be, it's very tense and they're going to be picked on.
North America's first mosque was established in Edmonton. It has one of the country's largest Muslim communities. But even so, the Canadian Islamic Centre is warning of a possible backlash against Muslims in this city and across the country. This mosque has already received one threatening phone call, just like the reaction after the Oklahoma City bombing in the mid-1990s.
The Muslims were automatically blamed, and there was phone calls and there was threats and there was actually acts of violence against the Muslim community, although they had nothing to do with it. So there's certainly a sense of fear here.
Presidential staffers are moved quickly.
Canada's Islamic organizations have all condemned the attack in the United States, offering help, urging members to donate blood, and asking Canadians to keep an open mind in these tense days.
Islam does not condone in any form of violence. I mean, Islam, the very word, means peace.
As abnormal as this situation is, just let's take this one day at a time and basically remain calm.
But Edmonton's Muslim community knows things could be difficult for the next while. It's appealing to its own members to set an example and, if necessary, turn the other cheek. Margot McDermott, CBC News, Edmonton.
Ottawa moved quickly in the wake of the attacks. Police forces in the national capital were moved to high alert. Some embassies were shut, and there were special precautions at one of the most visible U.S. properties in Ottawa. Here's Paul Hunter.
It's the biggest and most important U.S. government building in Canada. And so today at the American Embassy in Ottawa, they took no chances. All non-essential workers were told to leave.
Sir, can we get your reaction to what's going on inside?
No comment right now, thank you.
And those who work nearby wondered, could the U.S. Embassy be a target?
I'm really scared, and I want to go as far away from here as possible.
It set the tone for the day in Ottawa, where some roads were briefly blocked off, tourists told to leave the area.
You have to evacuate there?
Yeah. We have been asked by the police to evacuate the west.
Even the Chateau Laurier Hotel was evacuated because of a brief bomb scare. And like its other embassies around the world, Israel's, in this Ottawa office building, was evacuated too. So were nearby offices.
Just sheer relief fell over the whole office.
Police doubled their numbers on the streets. Hospitals and ambulances were put on alert. The RCMP says it's doing all it can.
But I can assure you we are doing everything possible to gather the very best intelligence so that we can use that intelligence to respond appropriately to whatever threat there is to Canadians and obviously other embassies and so on in Canada.
Of course, after all the worries, the evacuations, the extra police, nothing terrible happened in Ottawa. But on this day, no one's complaining about all the extra precautions. Better that than the now all too imaginable possibilities. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Ottawa.
Prime Minister Jean Chrétien says the government has beefed up security in the wake of the attacks, and across the national capital, signs that this country is indeed taking security very seriously. Here's the CBC's Jason Moskowitz.
What started as a normal day on Parliament Hill soon became a day of heightened security. The barricades went up, visitors were asked to leave. Cabinet ministers across the country tried to get up to speed. That was especially the case for Lawrence Macaulay, the minister responsible for the RCMP.
Of course, I don't have the in-depth detail of every step that the Security Intelligence Agency take, but obviously we have a very strong security intelligence teams in the U.S. and in this country. Obviously, there's been a desperate, terrifying act of terrorism that we will all have to deal with.
In the early afternoon, Prime Minister Chrétien expressed sympathy from all Canadians.
Canadians show their solidarity with our neighbors, and the news to come are when we discover the number of people who died will be probably very tragic.
Chrétien then talked of Canadian security measures but stayed away from specifics.
We have talked with the RCMP, with the Solicitor General and the head of the RCMP, and with the Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army, and everybody has increased the level of security everywhere.
Heightened security was evident over Whitehorse this afternoon. Canadian fighter jets tracked a Korean plane. There were fears of a possible hijacking, but in the end the plane reported problems because of a fuel shortage, the result of circling for too long. In Toronto, Premier Mike Harris offered all the medical help his province could muster.
I have instructed all branches of the provincial government that Ontario will provide whatever support is needed.
Alberta Premier Ralph Klein wondered if the G8 summit scheduled for his province next June should be cancelled.
It's my personal thought that it would be absolute folly to proceed with a summit of that magnitude.
A report from the CBC's chief political correspondent, Jason Moskowitz. To financial news now, and overseas markets are reacting badly to yesterday's attacks. In Japan, the benchmark stock index, known as the Nikkei stock average, lost almost 7% of its value. It plunged below the 10,000-point mark for the first time in 17 years as traders dumped shares in reaction to the attacks. Hong Kong's market was off 10%, and South Korea's market suspended trading within minutes after losses reached the allowable one-day limit. Officials, by the way, at the Toronto Stock Exchange meet later this morning to decide whether to resume trading. The TSE's composite index was down nearly 300 points when trading was halted at 10:40 a.m. on Tuesday. Across the Atlantic in Europe, it is a new day. European markets are open and reacting to the events in the U.S. There are also some high-profile meetings planned for today in Europe. Azeb Wolde-Gjörges is in our London bureau. Azeb, first of all, to the market news, how are Europe's markets reacting to the way the Asian markets have gone?
Well, it's maybe too soon to talk about it. All I can say is that the trading will continue today. The market seems to be quite volatile, and the London Stock Exchange will remain. So that's all I can tell you this morning.
In terms of the high-profile meeting, of course, there was a NATO meeting slated for today. What do you know about that?
It's in about 3 hours, the NATO meeting. This morning, Jack Straw gave a press conference. Of course, there's disbelief, shock, and he was saying that this is an event of unimaginable proportions with appalling consequences. He expressed his full solidarity to the United States. Of course, Britain is America's closest ally, and they'll be sharing intelligence on who did this. There's an interesting point that a professor at the University of Cambridge stated today. He said that there is fear that this is not over yet, and people are wondering what's the next target. So there's a lot of concern about that. Today, Britain has announced a major tightening of security at government buildings, military bases, and of course the airport. There are no flights out of Britain to America or Canada, and there are no flights over central London. Also, British Airways has suspended all flights to Tel Aviv and Islamabad.
Azeb, one last question for you. Often looking at newspapers in different parts of the country is a good indication of how people in that country see events as they unfold. You've got the benefit of the morning papers. What are they saying, and what are some of the reports that are circulating in the UK?
There is one word in all the headlines, all newspapers, is war. The Guardian headlines were a declaration of war. The Times newspaper, which is a conservative newspaper, talked also war on America. There was an interesting editorial in The Guardian, which is the liberal newspaper here in England, saying that America must stay cool. Right now the temptation, of course, is that somebody must pay for this. And the last sentence of the editorial was, America, take a deep breath and stay calm in front of all this catastrophe.
Azeb, thank you. CBC's Azeb Wolde-Gjörges joining us from our bureau in London. Of course, leaders from Europe have passed on their condolences. Leaders in the Middle East were also offering their sympathy to the United States. But as Neil MacDonald reports, there was a very different reaction on the street.
In Arab East Jerusalem, groups of people took to the street, celebrating, toasting Osama bin Laden, and generally hailing whomever managed to inflict such a lethal blow against Israel's closest ally and greatest protector. There were similar celebrations in the cities of the West Bank and in the Palestinian refugee camps of Lebanon. Most Arab leaders, though, understanding the sheer foolishness of taunting Americans at a time like this, were greatly restrained.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
Palestinian extremist groups, though, issued cold denials and took the opportunity to lecture the United States. We are opposed to U.S. oppression, said this leader of Hamas, itself a group that has dispatched suicide bombers. We call upon the U.S. to take fair stands and not take Israel's side.
We deny our responsibility, but we call upon the American administration to review their attitude and their policy towards the Palestinian question, because this policy arouses the anger and the hatred of our people and of all Arab and Islamic peoples.
Israeli leaders universally expressed grief and condolences. Israel's Foreign Minister Shimon Peres says it pains Israel's heart and urged the world to organize against what he called terror, saying several countries are known to be terror centers and the world must not leave them free to play with people's lives. I hope the world understands today that its first enemy is Islamic terror, said Israel's defense minister. On the popular Israeli political program Popolitica, an Israeli general called for the immediate liquidation of Yasser Arafat. And from a former prime minister,
we here in Israel have been standing and fighting at the front line against terrorism for years, but now terrorism is struck at the heart of freedom. And this is exactly what this battle is. It's a battle between the forces of tyranny and terrorism and the forces of freedom and democracy.
And that is no doubt how the Arabs of the Middle East fear the lines will be drawn from now on, with them cast irretrievably as terrorists, and the word Islam synonymous with atrocity in the Western mind. It's probably fair to say that most people here, Arab and Jew, believe their lives changed today, and that the geopolitical lines here have shifted radically. Certainly the current Palestinian uprising with its overt Islamic dimension is going to be seen in quite a different light, beginning tomorrow. Neil MacDonald, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Security has been put on high alert at border crossings between Canada and the United States. As Ian Hannah-Mansing reports, U.S. authorities are taking a long look at everyone trying to enter their country.
At the Peace Arch border crossing atop the monument to the longest undefended border in the world, two flags at half-mast, half-staff, a symbol of the tragedy that trumped the optimism of the words inscribed on the arch. May these gates never be closed. This gate to the United States was sealed shut for about 20 minutes this morning. And when it reopened, it was at the highest level of security, what customs officers call a Code 1. The last time border checks were this thorough was on the eve of the Millennium celebrations in 1999, after Ahmed Rassam was caught trying to smuggle explosives from British Columbia to Washington State. U.S. citizens were allowed slowly back into their country. Most non-Americans were turned away. These Canadians were headed to Oregon for a convention.
And then he said, I'm sorry, you cannot go through, the very easy thing, only Americans are allowed to go through.
On the Canadian side, heightened security as well. And at a crossing where usually more than 300 cars an hour would stream past, by midday, only about 75 vehicles each hour were trickling through. One veteran police officer said he's never seen this level of security at the border.
I've been policing in this area for over the course of 35 years. As far as on an emergent reaction, no, I've never encountered this type of slowdown.
It was a similar scene at some of the other major crossings. The Windsor-Detroit Tunnel was shut down for about 5 hours. And on the Ambassador Bridge, massive backups. At Niagara Falls, no complaints about the slow traffic, but outrage from Americans over the attacks.
Whoever did it, I hope they really get the crap knocked out of them. I mean, they will, as the Americans stand together.
It's a sad day for America. Still proud to be an American, but we need to straighten this out real quick and go after the parties. All-out war, that's what it is, just like Pearl Harbor.
By evening, very few cars were arriving at the Peace Arch border crossing. Those trying to get into Canada were met by an immigration officer who verified ID papers and then a gauntlet of customs officers. An official said this methodical and unusual level of security would continue indefinitely. Ian Hannah-Mansing, CBC News at the Peace Arch border crossing near White Rock, British Columbia.
Well, as we told you earlier, there is a report that Canada may have been used by some of the hijackers involved in this case, used as a crossing point into the United States. Again, that unconfirmed report is on the website of the Boston Herald. It wouldn't be the first time this country has been a place for terrorist arrests and planned their attacks on the United States. CBC's Terence McKenna has this report.
The most haunting foreshadowing of today's terror attack happened in Marseille, France in 1994. French commandos stormed an Air France jet which had been hijacked by Algerian Islamic militants. All the hijackers were killed. 159 hostages were freed. 7 had been killed. French authorities said the hijackers wanted to crash the plane fully loaded with fuel into Paris, if possible, into the Eiffel Tower. The trail from that case led French investigating magistrate Jean-Louis Bruguière to uncover a worldwide network of Islamic terrorists. His work has brought him to Canada and the United States.
This cell is spreading over the world like a web, you know. So it's very difficult to grasp this new threat. But it's very, very dangerous because their target is very different. They try to target not only France, but America.
French investigators established links that led from the 1994 hijacking through the Paris subway bombs in 1995 and 96. And the trail eventually led them to a group of terrorists in Montreal, which included Ahmed Ressam, the man arrested at the American border with powerful explosives in the trunk of his car in 1999. Salim Jiwa covered the Ressam case for the Vancouver province.
Well, I see the Ressam situation as a precursor of what was to come. I see that as I mean, the astonishing part is what Ressam was saying was the number of people who are trained. For example, he stated that 60 people are ready and on standby in Italy. He named a number of groups in Sweden, number of people in Germany. So I saw that as a precursor. I was talking to a security source in the United States and just a month ago, and he indicated that the U.S. was very nervous still that something would happen and they would be unable to stop it. He said to me that these people are not going to stop, and you know it.
Ahmed Ressam easily obtained a false Canadian passport and used it to travel to the city of Peshawar in the northwest frontier province of Pakistan. There he made contact with the Osama bin Laden organization and entered a terrorist training camp in nearby Afghanistan for months of instruction in bomb-making and assassination techniques. Islamic militants from many nations are trained in the Afghanistan camps. The bin Laden organization has been monitored for years by the U.S. security apparatus and the Situation Room at the White House. James Steinberg was Deputy National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration.
It's not simply a question of an individual belonging to one particular organization with one particular target, whether it's the GIA in Algeria or the Egyptian Islamic Jihad in Egypt, but rather a kind of loose network of people who have common affiliations, common training, common associations, frequently linked to Afghanistan, which becomes sort of a pool of individuals who may be available to be involved in terrorist operations elsewhere in the world.
The Ressam case has brought to light numerous connections between the Osama bin Laden organization and Canada.
Yes, indeed. There are other names, as you know, people who have direct telephonic links in Canada with Osama bin Laden's right-hand man, Abu Zubaydah. There are people like that in Calgary. There are people like that in Vancouver. There are people like that in Montreal. There are people like that in Toronto. Numerous telephonic links have been found with very sinister people and very dangerous people in Canada.
Suspected terrorists in Canada are monitored by the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, CSIS, and agents like Dan Lambert.
Counterterrorism is the main priority of the CSIS in terms of its mandate. We have 2/3 of our resources are dedicated to counterterrorism. We work extremely closely with the RCMP, with the Department of Justice, with CIC and Customs within Canada, as well as U.S. authorities. And in fact, I mean, we have liaison relationships with 130 different countries and over 250 different agencies.
What's valuable about the Ressam case is that it reinforces the necessity of this kind of cooperation. As you say, there were links in not only between individuals operating in the United States, individuals operating in Canada, but also in Europe. And as we began to uncover them, I think it reinforced among officials involved in law enforcement and intelligence the critical need for this kind of transnational cooperation.
Why would Islamic terrorists come to Canada? David Harris is former Chief of Strategic Planning at the Canadian Security and Intelligence Agency.
I think in terms of Islamic extremists in Canada, they regard the proximity of Canada to the U.S. as making Canada a kind of Islamic extremist aircraft carrier for the launching of major assaults against the U.S. mainland. And that's something we've got to remember.
Today's massive coordinated attack shows a level of sophistication well beyond what had been anticipated or predicted in the North American intelligence community. Most intelligence analysts thought a conspiracy of this magnitude would show up in the massive wiretapping and monitoring of suspected terrorists.
Indeed, this is a complete failure of intelligence. The United States, Canada, and allied intelligence services for a long time will be dissecting how such a major conspiracy that must have used the airwaves, may have used the internet as a contact point, could get through and be carried out without anybody waking up. This is havoc that has been created, and I suppose many heads will roll, and there will be lots of postmortems conducted on how such a major conspiracy could be concealed.
Congresswoman Jane Harman served on the U.S. Counterterrorism Intelligence Committee and has long pleaded for more resources to deal with international terrorism.
What is very worrisome is the goals of terrorists have changed. It used to be that terrorists would try to kill a few people and make a political point. But as we stated in this terrorism report that I worked on last year, the goal no longer is a seat at the table. The goal is to blow up the table.
In the aftermath of the Ahmed Rassam case, there was a lot of finger-pointing at Canada, especially because Mr. Rassam was so easily able to take advantage of Canadian immigration and refugee regulations, and because it was so easy for him to obtain a false Canadian passport. There was a lot of American pressure on Canada to establish more stringent requirements in these areas, and after today, that pressure will surely increase. Terence McKenna, CBC News, Montreal.
Soon after the carnage began, people in this country were quick to jump into action. Here's the CBC's Matthew Pace.
They heard the news and saw the images, then lined up to help. Giving blood in Vancouver.
We've had an unbelievable response from our donors.
In Ottawa.
Horrified. It felt like you're looking at a movie, but it's obviously not.
In Calgary.
Really wanted to, give and do what I had to do from this end.
Canadians doing what they had to do to help their closest neighbors.
There's going to be a need for immediate care and comfort. These people have obviously suffered tremendous shocks to their system.
That will direct the operation on a national level.
The Canadian Red Cross is coordinating much of the relief effort.
Tracing service, can I help you?
Helping Canadians find American friends and relatives who may have been caught in the violence.
They really want to know, are their family members involved? Are they hurt? Can they help them?
But mostly they're doing whatever they're asked to do.
Coordination is the key thing. The important thing in terms of help coming in from the outside is that it comes through the appropriate channels and that they coordinate that.
Ontario Premier Mike Harris says people in his province and others are ready to pitch in.
We have offered assistance to the United States and New York governments. I have instructed all branches of the provincial government that Ontario will provide whatever support is needed.
Doctors, nurses, emergency workers are all prepared to offer their support.
The first and foremost thing that we'll look at is whether we can offer any assistance in the healthcare field because the priority becomes on the living.
So people such as Aliyah Galani are just waiting for the call.
If I can just help one person, it'll be a lot, but I know it's going to be a lot. I know maybe we're going to work like 16 hours or 18 hours a day when we go there, and I'm ready for that.
Ready to help out in a relief effort that's only just begun. Matthew Pace, CBC News, Montreal.
The Canadian Blood Services says it's expecting a huge demand from the U.S. for blood donations. To find out the location of clinics and hours, you can call 1-888-2DONATE. And to check on Canadians who may have been caught in the attacks, Foreign Affairs has a 24-hour emergency service line. That number, 1-800-387-3124. Be advised, both numbers are extremely busy. When our coverage of the USA under attack continues, I'll be joined by my colleagues at CBC Morning, Mark Kelly, Harry Forstall, Colleen Jones. Let's take a look at sunlight as it comes up over New York as we say goodbye for now.
Well, dawn approaches as we look at a live shot of New York City. The skyline changed forever by yesterday's horrific attack on the World Trade Center. A city still struggling to understand what has happened, and a country convinced it is now at war, but unsure who exactly the enemy is. You're watching a special edition of CBC Morning as we focus our entire program, of course, on this staggering event. Good morning, I'm Mark Kelly. We'll have complete coverage from our correspondents in Canada, in the United States, and around the world. But we begin with an update on what's been happening overnight. Let's go back to the News Center with Ben Chin. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Mark.